Likewise.
Hey, so welcome. If you're just joining us, I'm Drew Hudson. I'm the Executive Director here at Environmental Action, and thanks for joining us for our live web chat about Atlantic drilling and beyond. Questions about offshore drilling and federal energy policy related to oil drilling all over the country. We've got some great panelists with us tonight. We're going to give a couple minutes for some more folks to join us. So if you're just getting here, right below where I'm talking now, you'll see there's a little link down here about where you can type a message into the chat box if you want to ask a question or have a comment for our exciting panel. And we'll give just a few more minutes for some more folks to show up and join us, and then we'll get started probably about 5 or 7 minutes past the hour. So give us a couple more minutes to have some folks trickle in, and then we'll get going. Again, welcome. This is the Atlantic Drilling and Beyond web chat with Environmental Action and some other special guests. I'll introduce in a moment. Again, if you're just joining us, my name is Drew Hudson. I'm the Executive Director here at Environmental Action. This is the Atlantic Drilling Live web chat. We're going to get started in just a minute with our panel folks talking about offshore drilling in the Atlantic and beyond, including some breaking news from a very bad accident in the Gulf of Mexico just today. But before we get started, we're going to give a couple more minutes for some more folks to join us. If you're just getting here, I'm Drew Hudson. I'm the Executive Director at Environmental Action. We'll get started in just about another 2 minutes or so. So stand by. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started then. Thanks everybody for joining us. I know there were a couple of technical issues there getting started. So thanks for being patient with us while we got all set up here. Again, my name is Drew Hudson. I'm the Executive Director here at Environmental Action. Just to let you know, we are joined by an exciting crew of folks here from a variety of organizations that have been really leading the fight on offshore drilling, especially in the South Atlantic coast, where we just closed the comment period. And also fighting oil drilling and extreme energy extraction all over the country in a variety of formats. So excited to introduce you to our panel and let them mostly take it away. So you know our format here. We will have some presentations from folks at Oceana, from Environment North Carolina, and from Oil Change International, where our three panelists are from. And then we will have some questions at the end. So if you have a question or you have a thought as we're talking, feel free to type it into the little chat box down below. If you're following along on Twitter or on Facebook, you can use the hashtag #SaveOurCoasts. That's plural, #SaveOurCoasts. To send a question or a comment that way. And we should get back to questions and have some Q&A with folks a little bit later in the hour, probably after about 15 or 20 minutes of giving some overviews and perspectives from around the country. With that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Nancy from Oceana, to talk a little bit about the most recent comment period that closed at the Department of Interior, which was about this new idea to open the South Atlantic coast, in particular, to oil drilling for the first time in several decades. So Nancy, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Nancy Pine. I'm the grassroots manager for Oceana, based in Washington, D.C. Oceana is the largest international ocean conservation group, but our climate and energy campaign is focused on protecting the oceans from the impacts of climate change, and in particular preventing the expansion of offshore drilling to places where it doesn't exist, like the Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean, as well as promoting the expansion of clean energy alternatives like offshore wind. So on Monday, we were very, very excited to deliver over 420,000 comments to the Department of Interior. This was a culmination in the efforts of dozens of groups around the country, and it was just really a moment of pride to be able to be a part of this. We stood on the steps with Drew and one of Dave Rogers from Environment North Carolina's compatriots in DC, as well as a number of other groups. And we delivered, as I said, over 400,000 comments urging the administration to take the Atlantic, and in many cases also the Arctic Ocean, out of the picture in their 5-year plan for drilling for oil and gas offshore. And one fun little comment is the person from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management who met us she was in several of the pictures with us, but she took her own and actually tweeted it out of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management social media accounts. That was a kind of a fun little get-to. But I wanted to just give you all a little bit of background on this campaign. You know, I personally have been working with Oceana on this for about 2 years, and Oceana's been working on it for a year more. And I know a number of groups have been working in some way, shape, or form on this particular issue. But just some brief background, it basically started in the summer of 2008. Until that point, the Atlantic was off limits to offshore drilling. And in the summer of 2008, I remember it very sharply, actually, because it was the first time that I was doing a big road trip with some of my friends. We were out in California that summer, and at some places we were gassing up, and it was over $6 a gallon for oil and for gasoline. So that was the first time I had a really personal encounter with how expensive gas was, and I think a lot of folks were feeling that way in that summer. And we heard a lot of drill baby drill here, drill now, drill everywhere. It was a big part of the presidential campaign of McCain and Sarah Palin. And in that summer, both Congress and the president succumbed to all of that pressure, and they went from having two layers of protection for the Atlantic Ocean to 0. And to be honest, it took our community really by surprise. So this was, the last months of George W. Bush's tenure, and we were hopeful that when Obama took office that he would reverse that decision and at least go back to having 1 layer of presidential protections for the Atlantic. It became pretty apparent pretty quick that he wasn't willing to do that, and he actually wanted to explore the idea of offshore drilling, at least off the coast of Virginia. Luckily, we had government bureaucracy and slowness on our side, and that they were moving forward, but in April of 2010, the BP disaster happened. I'm sure it's fresh on your mind, it's fresh on my mind, but that was actually 5 years ago. And in 2010, because it was such a big issue and so much so on the public's radar, the president reversed that decision and put it on hold. However, one thing that he did not put on hold was the idea of exploring for oil and gas off the coast. And they started, the administration started going forward with a proposition to allow for seismic air gun testing in the Atlantic Ocean. So it was supposed to begin in 2012, but largely to the efforts of organizations like NRDC and Oceana and various other groups working on this issue, we really sounded the alarm and said, well, first, we oppose offshore drilling in the Atlantic to begin with, so we don't want this first step. We don't want to know what's out there. But secondly, seismic air gun testing is incredibly dangerous in and of itself. And what it is a big ship will drag an array of air guns behind the boat, and it's generally from 35 to 40 air guns. And what they do is they blast compressed air down to the seafloor, and it comes back up. And they have hydrophones to collect the data that it finds. And you can imagine something has to be incredibly loud to not only penetrate the entire ocean water column, but to go miles below the seafloor and come back up to deliver that data. So seismic air gun testing is very, very noisy, and it's very dangerous for marine wildlife that depends on hearing to survive, like whales and dolphins. And in the government's own estimates, they predict that over 100,000 marine mammals will be injured and possibly killed due to this testing. However, they're still allowing it to move forward. So right now we're on two parallel tracks. One is the 5-year plan for offshore oil and drilling, and that's the comments that we delivered on Monday. But the other is the track of seismic air gun testing. And the federal level, they've permitted it, but they haven't permitted it on a state-specific level, and that's where the fight really is. So we are working with local communities, both our grassroots team and our coalition partners in various states, to really just get the people who oppose both testing for oil and gas via seismic air guns, as well as offshore drilling itself, to be as loud as possible. Our grassroots team has been together a little over a year, and in that time we've seen 46 communities from small beach towns in North Carolina up to huge cities like Charleston in South Carolina come out opposing offshore oil and gas development and exploration. We've seen countless members of Congress, local elected officials, 75 scientists, various fishermen group come out saying this is a bad idea, this doesn't make sense for the Atlantic coast. This is, as everyone on this call knows, the Atlantic Ocean is the bread and butter for coastal communities, tourism, recreation, and it's just a place that we all love. So I think it's been frustrating to see the administration moving forward on a lot of these proposals, but also incredibly exciting and heartening to see so many different groups really just coming out strong, and truly this has been a bipartisan effort. I think one of my organizers, our organizer in North Carolina, is listening in now, and he could tell you that he's got volunteers across the political spectrum. And I think one of the really big strengths of this campaign is that we can work as a regional group with people in DC, with folks like Dave who are in communities and can really put a stop to this effort. So I think that's my 7 minutes.
That's great. Thanks, Nancy. Lots of exciting updates and a good sort of turn of events on Monday, having this big comment delivery in Washington, D.C. But obviously that's not the end of the process. We've been fighting to keep drilling off the coast of the South Atlantic for a long time. Monday morning's event really was a sort of pivot or a turn in that. And so our second guest, Dave Rogers from Environment North Carolina, is here to tell us a little bit about how that fight is going on the ground in some of the coastal states in the Atlantic and Southeast who have been working to keep drilling off of our shores for the last couple of years, and especially in the last couple of months. So Dave, over to you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Drew, and thanks for everyone who's tuning in. My name's Dave Rogers. I'm the Director of Environment in North Carolina. We're a state-based environmental advocacy group that works to protect North Carolina's air, water, and open spaces. And In general, we just think there's something really special about North Carolina, and there's just a number of places across our state that are worth protecting for future generations. So for any North Carolinians out there who like to spend time, hiking up along the Blue Ridge Parkway, or going either live on the coast or go out to the coast for beach weekends, there's just a number of places that make North Carolina such a great place to live and visit. And in North Carolina, we think drilling absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. So we have some of the most world-renowned beaches, whether it's the Outer Banks, which draw more than 11 million visitors per year and generate more than $1 billion a year in tourism, or it's down in historic Wilmington with the beaches around that area that are home to the film industry, world-class universities, and just a really great community in which to live. And then personally, my folks actually live down in Brunswick County in southern North Carolina, so I've got a kind of personal investment in keeping our coast protected. So when BOEM and the Obama administration announced plans to potentially explore the idea of drilling off the coast of North Carolina, Environment North Carolina, with a whole host of organizations, including Oceana, the North Carolina Sierra Club, the Surfrider Foundation, and a host of others, really leapt to action and came together to make sure that we were getting the voices and those voices elevated from coastal communities, but then all across the state. So in North Carolina, originally there was a plan to have just one public hearing on the offshore drilling plans, and that was going to be held in Wilmington. And in coalition with a bunch of organizations, we were able to turn out over 400 people to that hearing, which at the time was the largest turnout for any of the public comment hearings that BOEM was holding along the coast to determine whether or not it makes sense to drill off of the Atlantic. And then through our work, as well as advocacy from some of our local and even congressional elected officials, including Walter Jones, we were able to convince the Department of Interior to host a second hearing here in North Carolina in the Outer Banks. So for those of you who've been out to the Outer Banks, it's a little bit slower out there during the winter. The communities, there's only 37,000 folks who actually live on the islands out there year-round. In spite of that, more than 670 people turned out to that hearing, which according to BOEM was the largest hearing in the history of the actual Bureau. So they had more comments from the Outer Banks than any other comment period that they've had at a single hearing in their history. So our overall kind of goal and strategy is to make sure that we paint our governor, who's supportive of drilling, as out of touch with what coastal communities and then folks who spend their time on the coast, to make sure that people realize that Governor McCrory is just kind of out of touch of the wishes of the people. So step one was to turn out as many people to those hearings as possible, and we've been largely successful in painting that picture, getting a ton of media coverage around those issues, and just making sure the coastal community voices are heard on this. Nancy touched on the second part of our strategy, which is to make sure coastal communities are also passing those resolutions. So we're working with Oceana, who's taking the lead on that, to make sure that we continue to engage the coastal communities that stand to lose the most. And we're working to expand that work to make sure all the coastal communities have elevated their voices and sent the message to DC that they don't want drilling along our coasts. The second step, and the next part of our plan is we need to make sure all the people who live inland, who go to the coast during the summers, are getting their voices heard on this issue as well. So as the summer season is close upon us, it was about 72 here in the Triangle today. We're working to launch our efforts to start to engage those folks along the who use the coast as a recreation opportunity. So The great folks at Surfrider have already started to put up billboards for people who come out to the Outer Banks, highlighting that drilling could be, if drilling was to come to North Carolina, it would actually ruin their vacation. So if you're heading from Raleigh out to the coast, take a look for the giant billboard that'll be on your right-hand side. And then additionally, we're going to be doing a set of events along the beaches up and down the coast, asking folks to take photo petitions, holding up comments about why they want to see their beaches protected. And we'll be using social media as well as just old-fashioned snail mail and one-on-one conversations to get that message up to folks in DC. And then the last part of just in general our strategy is to make sure all those messages get to Governor McCrory as well. So the big reason why North Carolina is actually even under consideration right now is because Governor McCrory has been leading the charge to drill off the North Carolina coast. So we ultimately need to make sure that he understands where North Carolinians stand on this issue, and that he realizes that it's not a popular position, and so that if we can't get him to come out and oppose drilling, we can at least mute him a little bit, so that President Obama and the Department of Interior, weighs the constituent concerns, and Governor McCrory silences his voice a little bit on this issue. So ultimately, this is just the first step in a year-plus long effort that we're undertaking. We've got obviously a big road ahead of us, but if the efforts that we've seen from the local communities on the coast so far are what we can expect over the next year, we're really confident that we can permanently protect the Outer Banks and all of North Carolina's coastal communities from offshore drilling, both now, but then move forward to some sort of permanent protection so that we don't have to be fighting this battle every 5 years like we have been. So thanks, Drew, for having me. And then any folks who are from North Carolina, you can go to environmentnorthcarolina.org or oceana.org to figure out how to get plugged into the work that we're doing here in the state.
Great. Yeah, if you tuned in just a few minutes ago in the little chat log down below, if you're watching on the Covered Live chat on Environmental Action's website, and we'll share these links out later, there are links to some of the resources that have been mentioned so far. So Oceana's toolkit on how to get your town to oppose or pass resolutions opposing offshore drilling, and also links to Environment North Carolina's great research and work on the same. So we've heard a little bit about the Atlantic drilling plan in particular, and the recent comment period that just closed at the Department of Interior. I've heard a little bit about the local scene from North Carolina, one of the states that potentially could be impacted the most if we were to lift the offshore ban and open up drilling in the southeastern part of the Atlantic coast. And now for sort of a little bit more of a global perspective, or at least a national perspective, I've got David Turnbull from Oil Change International. Talk about how all these things fit together and how we connect the dots between this rush to drill both off the coast of the Atlantic and also in the Arctic. Just had an announcement from the Obama administration permit Shell's proposal to drill for oil in the Arctic. And then today, of course, big accident in the Gulf of Mexico, where a place where there's already oil drilling permitted and ongoing both on the American side and on the Mexican side where the accident today was. So here with a little national or international perspective, as their name implies, is David Turnbull.
Hey, thanks so much. So yeah, I'm David Turnbull. I'm campaigns director with Oil Change International, and we're a group that focuses on exposing the true costs of fossil fuels and tries to break down the barriers to a truly, green economy. So I'm actually based in California. I'm in San Francisco, a long ways away from North Carolina. But what we know is that drilling off the coast of the East Coast, as well as in the Arctic and the other places that the offshore drilling plan is suggesting, affects us all. Today, our governor stood at a site that should be under 5 feet of snow, and it looked as if it was totally summer conditions. Our drought is a tremendous drought. It's one that is being exacerbated by climate change and is simply, a look at what the future lies ahead for us if we continue down the road of the energy economy that we have today. So, when we look at the offshore drilling plan, we're looking at climate science that tells us that we already have far too many fossil fuels than we can afford to burn. scientists say that we have to keep some 80% of fossil fuels that are proven reserves underground or under the water, as the case may be, if we want to have any chance of really addressing climate change and keeping it to a level that's safe for our communities. So when we see a plan that proposes to drill in new places, whether it's the Atlantic coast or the Arctic or new spots in the Gulf of Mexico, what we're seeing is a plan that's completely counter to our president's own really actually strong rhetoric on the need to address climate change. On the same day that they announced the approval of the Shell lease in the Arctic, they announced the UN climate negotiations, or for the UN climate negotiations, that were pretty strong, and that are taking actions on climate, and it's this issue of really being somehow contradictory. So what we're focused on is really ensuring that as we are looking at our nation's energy policy on the one hand, it is actually synced up with our nation's climate policy. Offshore drilling and proposed offshore drilling simply is out of sync with that. We're talking about billions of barrels of oil that is not even considered under the sort of proven reserves that we already have far too much of. And so we need to ensure that it stays under the water if we want to have a safe climate. So, as I look at the drought in California, and at the same time, the explosion today off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico really is an indicator of how out of whack the so-called all of the above energy policy is with the real sort of safer future that we all know we want to see in the world. The president laid out a test when he considered the Keystone XL pipeline, or as he is considering the Keystone XL pipeline, that says that if it is going to exacerbate the problem of greenhouse gas emissions, in other words, if it is out of sync with our commitments to protect our climate, it should not be built. Our view is that same climate test should be applied to all of our energy policy, whether it is offshore drilling, whether it is pipelines, whether it's new refineries or coal mines or other things. That climate test, or the Keystone Principle, as some have called it, is a principle that should be applied throughout. So our commitment to working with groups such as those on the call here is really not only for the protection of beautiful coastlines and communities that rely on all of the different benefits those coastlines provide, but also because on a broader level, drilling off the coast of North Carolina threatens us in California as well. So that's sort of where we are coming in on this, and we think it's an important angle of this discussion. There was an article in the science journal Nature that actually pointed out that drilling in the Arctic, in offshore drilling, should be completely off the table if you are going to be meeting our climate objectives. The same could be said for any unproven reserves, which the Atlantic reserves are actually considered, because they already are far beyond what we can afford to burn. So it's a pretty simple calculation when it comes down to it. We know that our oil demand is actually going down in the U.S., thankfully, thanks to a variety of policies and measures, and to increase efficiency of cars, and also to increase more public transportation, but also because the newer generations of drivers are actually choosing to live different lifestyles. So we know that our oil demand is going down. Meanwhile, the idea of increasing our oil drilling offshore, onshore, and anywhere actually is really counter to that really positive movement. So again, we think that offshore drilling fails not only the test of protecting our water and communities, but also it clearly fails a climate test as well.
Great. Thanks, David, and thanks everybody for interesting updates and comments, different perspectives on this question about drilling in the Atlantic and drilling everywhere from around the country. So we're going to open it up now for some questions from folks. I've seen a couple of comments and questions come in already, and if you're just joining us, so you know, you can add a question either by tweeting at us on the hashtag #SaveOurCoasts, that's plural, and all one word, so #SaveOurCoasts. Or you can type a comment in the little chat box, which is down here under the picture of the beach with the giant burning oil rig off the shore, which is the thing we're trying to prevent. So send us a comment or a question if you have one for any or all of our panelists, and we'll try and get to a couple of them in the next 20 minutes or so. So one question I saw come in earlier from a commentator was asking about an issue that Nancy, you had talked about. Ted was asking about seismic testing and says that seismic testing will create a ton of damage even if nothing is ever drilled. Every boat around here will want to blast long before any oil companies even get into the area to drill. So obviously one of the issues that Oceana and Environment North Carolina both have been working on is about stopping seismic testing, sort of a precursor to the actual drilling. Do you want to say a little bit more about sort of where we're at in that right now, in that fight, and potentially what's coming next as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one. So clearly you know what it is, and I hope that all the viewers were able to hear a little bit about it, but if you do want to learn more about seismic airgun testing, we have a lot of information on our webpage, and I think Drew will probably send that link around too. But I mean, you're absolutely right. Seismic airgun testing is incredibly dangerous. In addition to being the first step to offshore drilling, it's just a very disruptive process. The thing that I think we have going for us here is, well, first of all, they have been working to get air guns in the water for the past 3 years, and we've successfully delayed them for that long. So we've been able to throw a lot of hurdles at them, and you know, I think one of the things that we've been successful at is just to be able to really challenge a lot of their science on this. Currently, the Bureau is saying that seismic air guns will not have any population impacts on marine mammals. Well, one, that runs counter to the environmental impact statement and the environmental analysis that they themselves did. And two, it's just not true. 75 leading scientists in the field of marine science have come out saying that seismic air guns will in fact impact marine wildlife, especially marine mammals like whales and dolphins. But seismic air guns also have impacts on fish. We've seen literature that shows that airgun blasting can reduce catch rates, for commercial fisheries. It has done that for species like cod and haddock and other places. So we're just working to make that case to the communities, to the groups like fishermen who will be impacted, and really make the economic argument. Because, you know, we talk about whales and dolphins, and obviously we at Oceana, I personally love whales and dolphins, but that argument doesn't necessarily work with everyone. So the fact that we're putting at risk the bread and butter industries of coastal communities and coastal states is really unacceptable. And a lot of the coastal communities that I mentioned and Dave mentioned have not only opposed offshore drilling, but have opposed seismic air guns off their coast. So where we're at in the process is working to magnify all of that coastal opposition up to members of Congress and up to the government level, working to delay and oppose the permitting process at the state level, and we do have one more opportunity or actually 2 more opportunities at the federal level to delay and to impede this process. I mean, ultimately, we oppose seismic air gun testing. We don't want that to happen. But if we take the Atlantic out of the 5-year plan for offshore drilling, and eventually work to permanently ban offshore drilling in the Atlantic, it's not going to be economically viable for these companies to spend a ton of money to go out there and blast the waters. So I've talked about a parallel tracks that we're on. We also have parallel strategies to oppose this harmful process.
Great. So sort of a precursor strategy there, seismic testing. Look for oil, and best way to stop it, just ban the oil drilling. It's an easy way to keep seismic testing out as well. Second question I saw come in was talking about an issue. Dave, you had talked about in North Carolina targeting your governor who is pro-drilling. In South Carolina, where I live, we also have a pro-drilling governor, Nikki Haley. So I wonder if there are some things you would say about the strategies that some of the southeastern states are taking where the governors and some local governments are in favor of offshore oil drilling, even though we think in the long run that's detrimental, and particular coastal communities have been resisting it. But what's the news from folks who are fighting local governments in some ways to keep the drilling offshore?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And then one thing to note, just to follow up on Nancy's comments, there's seismic hearings coming up in states, including 2 in North Carolina, one on the 7th in Wilmington, and then one on, I think, the 24th in Kill Devil Hills. 20. Great. So, so if you are interested in that issue and you want to help fight offshore drilling in general, and you live along the coast, please attend one of those 2 hearings. To be honest, like the easiest way that we could get North Carolina and then any of the states out of the 5-year drilling plan would be to have the governor ask for it. It's no coincidence along the East Coast that the 5-year plan starts in Virginia, where Governor McAuliffe is supportive of, and goes all the way to the Florida border, where Governor Scott actually opposes offshore drilling. So the drilling area is distinctly based on where the support from the governor's houses in those areas exists. And that is both because, you know, the Obama administration wants to hear from state leaders, but then also because of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, governors have a disproportionate amount of weight in this decision-making process. That being said, they're not the only decision maker, so most of our strategy is focused on building support amongst these coastal communities and getting their voices elevated up into DC so that the Obama administration and the regulators at BOEM are hearing from those communities. Now, simultaneously, we'll be making sure to repeat those messages to Governor McCrory, but we think it's a long shot to get him to change his mind on it. So ideally, it quiets him down a little bit from stopping, you know, kind of lessening the volume of the drum he's beating about offshore drilling. But then the other thing that we've seen and we've learned is that the more people hear about the risks associated with offshore drilling, the more and more they oppose it. So while some of these coastal communities that you mentioned might be supportive of offshore drilling now, a lot of our strategy is around public education of those local elected leaders and just those community leaders in general, because the more they learn about the risks associated with offshore drilling, the more they oppose it. So there's the risk associated with giant oil spills, things like BP that all communities fear, but a lot of communities don't understand the industrialization that goes along with offshore drilling, even if there isn't a giant spill. So massive pipeline infrastructure from offshore into the coast. They have to rework and rebuild all these coastal ports to be able to handle the infrastructure that it takes to get oil back onto shore. Railway infrastructure that needs to be built. Other kind of, you know, commercial port stations, so that once the oil is actually brought onto shore, they have somewhere to store it. There is just a huge industrialization process that goes along with offshore drilling that one can just look at the Gulf Coast to see what we can expect. And this is separate from giant BP-like oil spills. The other thing that communities aren't aware of is that oil leaks and oil spills all the time. We have had, on average, a 100,000 gallon or larger oil spill every other year for the last 40 plus years. So while the industry will say that they created a set of safety regulations that will avoid another BP oil spill, the reality is they cannot stop spills from happening, and they're happening all the time. So we can expect spills to happen off the Atlantic coast and off the North Carolina coast, regardless of whether we have a giant oil spill. So educating the communities about what they can expect and what actually it means to allow offshore drilling will go a long way towards getting those communities to oppose offshore drilling. And I think the work of the community leaders in Oceania to pass these 46 different resolutions is proof that as those communities have learned more and more about it, more and more of them have come out opposed.
Yeah, that's great. And if you're joining us online, we've just posted a link to some town-by-town resources, including a great map from Oceania that shows all the different towns along the eastern seaboard that have passed resolutions to ban either offshore drilling or offshore seismic testing. And also in there are some ways that you can get information about how your town can take action to ban offshore drilling and seismic testing. So thanks, Oceania, for those cool resources you can get on the website. One other question I saw on Facebook from a member was about the oil spill that happened today. So I'm looking at you, David Turnbull. Give us a quick recap. Dave was just pointing out that essentially anywhere there's drilling, there is always spilling. This is a truth about the oil industry that perhaps is not as well documented as it should be in the popular press. But just today there was another big accident in the Gulf. I think it's reminding a lot of people of the BP disaster just because it claimed a lot of lives very quickly, and it was a huge blowout, sort of explosive style disaster. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where the oil industry has come, because I know Oil Change just has put up some recent research and sort of documenting some of the accidents that happen around the country about oil drilling in general.
Yeah, so unfortunately, at least at last count, the explosion at an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico on the Mexico side took 4 lives, which is tragic, of course, and injured another 16 or 20 or so, and forced the evacuation of some 300 people. This is a platform that is run by the state-run oil company in Mexico, Pemex, or Petróleos Mexicanos, and it's a really sharp reminder of what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with the Deepwater Horizon spill just about 5 years ago, April 20th, 5 years ago. I was down in Biloxi, Mississippi a month or two ago with some Gulf Coast and Gulf South advocates talking about the extreme energy extraction around the country, but particularly in the Gulf Coast, and listen to stories from fisher folk and local community members all along the Gulf Coast, from Gulfport to New Orleans and Biloxi, of course. And it's really devastating what's happened there. And seeing the footage of flames in the Gulf of Mexico again is just, it's striking. And we know that in the Arctic they expect almost guarantee that there will be accidents. They simply don't know how to do this without having accidents in the Arctic. And what they also know is that if there is a major spill in the Arctic, they don't really know how to clean it up there either. And so wherever we go, we know that there are the industry just is getting into uncharted waters, pardon the pun, in terms of what they're trying to do, and they're willing to take the risk. There's been a lot of discussion around how much BP has had to pay for the spill there, and of course they're trying to get out of a lot of the damages and liabilities that they should be paying up for, and so you can expect the same wherever they go. When we look at the all of the above energy strategy, we're seeing the oil industry sort of running amok in our country. The crude by rail explosion around the country has been really a concern to our communities, and every single time there has been a safety measure that the industry has said is going too far or is going to be too expensive, we actually find that those safety measures haven't actually been strong enough. Just as we saw the sort of the way in which the industry was going far beyond what their technology was ready to withstand with Deepwater Horizon, we can expect the same basically wherever they go, unfortunately. Their record on safety is poor at best.
Definitely not the guys you want to trust to run your offshore drilling operations, since they have such a bad track record on it.
That's right.
So probably our last question or comment of the night, another one from Facebook. Again, someone was commenting on the news about the spill, but John on Facebook was saying a sort of funny joke for April Fool's Day. What happens when you get a solar spill? You just get a sunburn. Been a couple of good jokes about solar spills versus oil spills today, it being April Fool's Day. But I know we posted a link to a report from Environment North Carolina about all the progress various cities around the state are making on solar power. So I wondered if for the end of our chat tonight we could turn a little bit to good news and hear some updates about solutions and alternatives to oil and extreme energy around the country. So maybe we'll start with Dave, but we can run through our other panelists as well. And talk about good news solutions that are coming online in ways that cities and towns and states and our country as a whole are taking action to get away from extreme energy and fossil fuels and use renewable resources instead.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I think in North Carolina we've got two great resources. One is the sun. The second one is the wind off our coasts. I would be willing to bet Nancy would like to talk a lot about the offshore wind. So I will leave that to her, other than to say that North Carolina actually has the most offshore wind potential of any Atlantic state. And according to a study done by UNC a few years ago, we could literally power 130% of the state's needs from offshore wind alone. Additionally, we get twice as much sun as Germany, which is the international leader in solar power. And solar is really just a thriving success story here in North Carolina. So last year, we added more solar power than any state other than California. Solar is just growing by leaps and bounds. The number of jobs created went up 121% 2 years ago. Last year, it grew another 80%, so that we now have over 5,600 people employed in the solar industry, which when you factor in the energy extraction industry, which we have zero of right now, solar is far and away the leading energy economy source of energy in terms of the economy here in North Carolina. And North Carolina, we just are really just barely tapping the potential. So we are working on a number of different fronts to help encourage solar development. Number one is at the state level, we are working to do a couple of different things. Number one is to allow for third-party sales. So here in North Carolina, you can only buy power from your utility, which in most cases is Duke Energy. And there is an opportunity to allow solar companies basically to own the panels on your rooftop, and you can pay a small monthly rate to lease those and get your power cleaner and cheaper than you're getting it from Duke Energy right now. Duke Energy is fighting that because they don't actually like competition, but this would open up a number of different doors, especially for residences and business owners to as well as nonprofits and government institutions to be able to get their power from the sun and actually have it be cheaper than the power bills they're currently paying from Duke. That bill has actually been introduced and it's being debated right now. So we are working to with people from conservatives, from clean energy, from the military, from Fortune 500 companies like Walmart and Target to actually get that bill passed so that we can have more energy choice. The other thing we're working to do is extend the state tax credits here that have been a huge reason why solar's taken off in North Carolina. So there's currently a tax credit that allows folks to recoup some of their costs, upfront costs for solar, and that's set to expire at the end of the year. And it is paid back the state roughly about 20 to 1. So for every $1 the state is given out in tax incentives, additional $19 of investment have flown into the state. So it's a huge winner in terms of using incentives to do what they're designed to do, which is encourage investment in the state. So we are working to get those extended as well. And then the last thing that we're doing is mostly at the local level, getting cities to learn from places like Raleigh, where we've seen solar really take off, and adopt a set of the policies and market the solar opportunities at the city level as well to just help spread the word and encourage businesses, residences, and government institutions to go solar. So there's a lot of great news in terms of solar, and our main role is just to kind of push that great news and continue to keep our foot on the gas in terms of the policies that have helped create the success story that we've had.
That's great. So some good news from North Carolina in particular. I have at least one fan on with us tonight. Ted was saying some great stuff about, or excuse me, Charlie was talking about the importance of pushing offshore wind development as well. A offshore resource, better than drilling offshore. So David or Nancy, anything else, good news stories you want to chime in with?
I just would love to quickly add, as I mentioned, we're big fans of offshore wind. Again, no pun intended. There's so many wind puns we could do. But we did, we published a report earlier this year, early January, I think it was around the 13th, and Drew, I'd love for you to share that link with the viewers. But the report showed that offshore wind would actually create twice as many jobs and twice as much energy as offshore drilling in the Atlantic. And we broke that down state by state. So I had a few of these on my desk, but this is our nice fact sheet out of for North Carolina. If you look at the numbers for, let's see, this state is Florida, but the blue is the jobs and energy created by offshore wind versus the orange, which is the jobs and energy created by offshore drilling. And this is for Florida in particular, where we had some of the biggest differences. But Dave's right. North Carolina is the state with far and away the most offshore wind potential. And the other good news about that is that we're further along in the permitting process for offshore wind in the Atlantic than we are for offshore drilling. So while we've been able to throw a lot of delay tactics at the administration in terms of offshore drilling and seismic airgun blasting, they have really made some tremendous leaps and bounds within President Obama's tenure. Dave might have better numbers, or David may have better numbers, but I think at this point we're at about 500,000 acres are leased off our coast for offshore wind, and it's exciting. And we also saw off the coast of Rhode Island, Block Island, the first offshore wind turbine go up. So we know this technology is ready. The government is eager to do it, and not only that, when it's done right, it's a huge job creator and clean.
That's great, and as Nancy asked, we have posted a link. It's in the chat right below the video window here if you're watching us on the website. We'll email it around as well to that nice report from Oceana showing there's more jobs in wind power than there are in offshore drilling. So last good news story, David Turnbull, you got anything else to add in the good news column?
Yeah, sure. You know, and I think what Nancy and Dave have sort of outlined on the growing renewables, solar and wind, offshore, et cetera, is fantastic. And it's so exciting to see. And as I mentioned earlier, we're also seeing gains in increasing fuel efficiency for cars and better public transportation and design of cities and communities to allow us to get unhandcuffed from our cars and from oil. But what I think I actually want to highlight is the growing opposition to the stranglehold that the oil industry really has on our economy in a lot of ways. Whether it's from the Keystone XL pipeline fight, or fights against offshore drilling, or fights against crude by rail and other citizen grassroots efforts, fracking, etc. We're seeing a pretty amazing swelling of support to move in a new direction, and to say that offshore drilling, addiction to oil is not inevitable. We can find a way to move forward in a new direction. and the growing support from around the country and around the world to take serious action on climate change, to take serious action to move away from oil, is something that I think is a huge success and is just a building success. So while the efforts to invest and push towards renewables and really moving in the right direction with our energy policy is fantastic. The flip side of that is that our efforts to really push back against bad energy policy are really growing and showing our strength as a movement in really impressive ways. Hopefully we'll see some really tangible successes in terms of turning this offshore drilling plan around, stopping the Keystone Pipeline, seeing our communities protected from crude by rail and other energy infrastructure projects that really are disastrous for our climate and communities in the coming months ahead, and I'm sure we will, because our strength as a movement is growing, and it's a really exciting thing to see.
Great. Well, thanks. And I can't think of a better way to end than on that sort of hopeful and uplifting note. So you have one or two more questions in the chat queue. We'll try and write you back the answers if you submitted a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it. But let's stop there because we're feeling so good right now. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to our panel, Dave Rogers of Environment North Carolina, David Turnbull from Oil Change International, and Nancy Pine from Oceana. Thanks, guys, for taking some time to chat about offshore drilling in the South Atlantic and everywhere else. Thanks, everybody who joined us and chimed in, whether you asked questions or just watched along. Appreciate your being here. And obviously, lots more work to come. There's lots more to do, but there's also a lot of good news on the horizon. We are working to stop all these offshore and other drilling plans to get ourselves off of fossil fuels, both in the ocean and on land, and move to a more sustainable energy economy in America. And there's good news on the horizon. So thanks for tuning in and being part of the chat. Thanks to our panel again for being here tonight. Thanks to all of you at home. And stay tuned for more updates from all these great groups and more links tomorrow where you can find out more research and more ways to take action online. Again, thanks and great night, everybody. My name is Drew Hudson. I'm the director here at Environmental Action, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.